The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, arrived in Syria today on an official visit to discuss military cooperation with the local president, Ashara. And such an event is already quite surprising in itself because Zelensky, the president of a country that has been in the fifth year of a grueling full-scale war with Russia, landed in Damascus. Zelensky set foot on land that for 53 years has been the domain of the Assad clan and for the past 11 years Putin's main aircraft carrier in the Middle East. But now this is Western territory, and I'm sure Vladimir Putin was simply losing his mind today when he saw footage of Zelensky from Damascus. But let's discuss why this event is evidence of the final dismantling of the Russian Empire in the Middle East, and how Syria under Ahmed al-Shara is turning from an enemy of Ukraine into its key partner, and what will happen now to the remnants of the Russian bases in Tartus and Khmeimim. But first, let me just remind you that in 2022 Bashar al-Assad was in Damascus, and Syria recognized the occupation of Ukrainian lands and supported the bloody dictator Vladimir Putin, and Assad's regime insisted that it was right for Russia to launch a full-scale attack on Ukraine. A few years pass and the situation changes dramatically. Now Zelensky visits Syria and holds talks with the president there. My name is Alexei Pechi. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, give it a like, and leave any comment you want. And friends, if you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so financially with any donation or a paid sponsorship subscription. How can you do that? All the links and details are in the description of this video. It says there, support the Alexei Pechi channel. Choose any format that's convenient for you. I'll be grateful for any support you give. And subscribe to my Telegram channel Peachy News. The link is also in the description of this video. So today, April 5th, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, during his visit to Syria, met with the country's president, Ahmed Ashara. Zelensky noted that during the meeting, Ahmed and he discussed the situation in the Middle East and Russia's war against Ukraine. Here is a quote from Zelensky. "We agreed to work together to provide more security and opportunities for development for our societies. We discussed the situation in the region and the prospects for improving it. We also discussed the circumstances of Russia's war against Ukraine. I am grateful for the support. There is great interest in exchanging military experience and expertise in the field of security. We touched upon Ukraine's role as a reliable supplier of food products. And we discussed joint opportunities to strengthen food security throughout the entire region. We are ready to work together so that the opportunities of our countries and peoples increase." It should be noted right away that Zelensky's visit to Damascus is not a coincidence. This is a logical conclusion to the process that began in December 2024 when Bashar Assad's regime collapsed under the pressure of the opposition, while Russia and Vladimir Putin were too busy holding the front near Pokrovsk in Ukraine. Let's recall the context here. In 2022, Bashar al-Assad was one of the few who officially recognized the so-called LPR and DPR. That is, these are the abbreviations for the Luhansk and Donetsk People's Republics, well, which exist only in the imagination of Russians. And Bashar al-Assad then supported the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by the savage Russians. At that time, Syria was an existential enemy for Kyiv, a supplier of mercenaries, and a transit point for stolen Ukrainian grain. Today, however, Syria sees Ukraine as a provider of security. Zelensky arrived in Damascus not to ask, but to offer expertise in clearing the territory of remnants of Russian PMCs, military companies, and Iranian proxy forces that are still trying to destabilize the young Syrian government. Also, don't forget that Syria is currently in a deep humanitarian crisis after decades of war, and here Ukraine has found its main lever of influence. The Grain from Ukraine program has already delivered the first 500 tons of wheat flour to Syria at the beginning of this year. But this was not just a delivery. Ukraine is actually pushing Russia out of the Syrian food market right now. If earlier Bashar al-Assad used to receive grain in exchange for loyalty to Moscow, now the new government in Damascus receives it as humanitarian aid and based on transparent trade contracts with Ukraine. Analysts from the Brookings Institution point out that food security is the foundation on which Ukraine is now building its influence in the Levant. As for the Russian military bases in Syria, there is also an interesting point here. Until recently, the bases in Tartus were considered permanent fixtures of Russian presence in the Mediterranean. However, according to Reuters, by January 2026, Russia had already begun moving some equipment from Syria to Africa, trying to save at least some assets. And here's an interesting point. Mostly the Russians were transferring their weapons and equipment from Syria to Libya. And Libya is mentioned here for a reason. Ukraine is now simply hot on the heels of the Russians. Literally, in one of the previous episodes, I talked about how the armed forces of Ukraine officially received 3 military bases in that very Libya, and now Ukrainian soldiers are training the Libyan army. And that means the Russians are now being driven out from there as well. Be sure to watch a separate episode on this topic. I really recommend it because, once again, they tried to move their forces from Syria to Libya, but even there, the Ukrainians got to them and are gradually pushing them out. And today, Zelensky is in Damascus discussing the issue of defense cooperation. Basically, Ukraine, following the example of its already established cooperation with the Libyan army, is offering Syria assistance in training its army according to standards that allow them to effectively counter Russian tactics. The irony is that Ukrainian instructors in Damascus can teach the Syrians how to finally drive the Russian military out of their last bases. And here is a brilliant quote from the president of Syria, Ahmed al-Shar, a direct quote. "Syria will no longer be a staging ground for other people's wars. We value Ukraine's experience in defending its sovereignty and see Kyiv as a partner who understands the price of freedom from imperial pressure." Well, there's another interesting aspect of cooperation here. It's obvious that Ashara has finally consolidated his power, so in the next couple of years Syria will become an arena for competition over contracts to rebuild infrastructure. And Ukraine is planning to play a significant role here. Ukrainian construction and energy companies, which have gained tremendous experience in rebuilding under fire, could become the main contractors in Syria. Moreover, joint projects may be launched to restore Syrian oil refineries, which were previously controlled by Prigozhin's organizations or other Russian oligarchs. Now these assets have been nationalized, and it's time to put them in order, and Ukraine can help. It's also interesting that Ukraine could become a key advisor to Syria on reforming its security services in order to permanently eliminate the influence of Ba'ath Party methods and Russian intelligence. Because it's still there. And I'm sure Russians will come into the comments under this video and write, "What can Ukraine possibly help with?" Well, just admit it. Just accept the new reality. You're nobody in the Middle East anymore. Your influence there has been reduced to zero. You're just dust that's been blown away in this Arabian desert, blown over there, toward the Arabian desert, blown into Azerbaijan, just like dust. But of course, we can't forget about the role of the Gulf states. And here I'll note that the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, which are now actively investing in the new Syria, see Ukraine as the ideal partner for this process. Kyiv provides military and food expertise, and what does the Gulf provide? Money. As you can understand, in this scheme, there is no place for Russia. Russia? How would it even show up there? And don't forget that Zelensky has already signed a whole series of agreements with Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Jordan, and Turkey the day before. They all last for quite a few years. In fact, Ukraine has burst, into the Middle East, and it's already obvious that they're not coming empty-handed. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. And if you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, I would be grateful. You can do this by making any donation using the links and details in the description of this video. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Bye everyone.